In the shadow of Rome's glory, a forgotten struggle unfolded, a rebellion so daring, it shook the empire to its core. This is the story of Spartacus, the gladiator who defied Rome. Rome, the center of the ancient world, stood unrivaled in the 1st century BCE. It was a colossus, stretching its influence from the shores of the Mediterranean to the farthest reaches of Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Its armies were feared, its wealth unmatched, its culture revered. Yet beneath the splendor of marble temples and glittering palaces, a darker truth lingered. This empire, built on power and conquest, rested on the backs of millions of enslaved men and women. They were the unseen foundation of Roman society, working the fields, toiling in mines, building the mighty aqueducts, and entertaining the masses in brutal spectacles of life and death. Slavery was not merely an economic system, it was a brutal institution of dominance and control. To be a slave in Rome was to endure a life stripped of freedom, subject to the whims of masters who wielded absolute power. Few dared to resist, fewer still dreamed of escape. But in 73 BCE, one man, enslaved, defiant, and unyielding, would lead a rebellion that would shake Rome to its very foundations. His name was Spartacus. Born in the rugged lands of Thrace, Spartacus was no ordinary slave. A warrior by blood and tradition, he was captured and sold into bondage, trained to fight and die for the amusement of Rome's citizens. Within the walls of the gladiator school in Capua, Spartacus honed his skills not for the arena, but for freedom. At a time when Rome seemed invincible, Spartacus dared to challenge its authority. Alongside a handful of fellow gladiators, he would ignite a rebellion unlike anything the empire had ever faced, a rebellion that would grow from a desperate escape to an organized uprising of tens of thousands. For a fleeting moment, Spartacus would not only defy Rome, but inspire those who had long lived in chains to dream of a world without masters. But what made this rebellion so remarkable? Was it simply the courage of one man, or the shared desire of the oppressed for freedom? How did a band of slaves manage to outwit and outfight Rome's finest legions? And what legacy did Spartacus leave behind in his struggle against tyranny? This is the story of a man who rose from the depths of despair to challenge an empire. The story of a rebellion fueled by hope, courage, and defiance. This is the story of Spartacus. Before we proceed, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. Long before Spartacus became a name whispered in fear by Roman generals, he was a son of Thrace. Thrace, a land of rugged mountains and fierce tribes, lay at the edges of Rome's growing empire. Its people were warriors, bound by a culture that revered strength, courage, and loyalty. They fought not for conquest, but for survival, defending their homelands from foreign invaders and rival clans alike. We know little of Spartacus's early life, but what we can surmise is shaped by the land and traditions of Thrace itself. He may have been born into a tribe that lived by hunting, herding, and raiding, skills that would later serve him well on the battlefield. Some suggest he was once a free man, possibly a soldier, fighting either for his tribe or as a mercenary in the service of Rome. But freedom in Thrace was fragile. By the early 1st century BCE, Rome's legions had begun their relentless expansion into the region, crushing resistance with brutal efficiency. For the Thracians, defiance often ended in chains. At some point, Spartacus's fate was sealed, perhaps betrayed by allies, captured in battle, or simply overwhelmed by the sheer might of Rome. He was taken prisoner. For the Romans, captured warriors were commodities, stripped of their names, identities, and dignity, and sold to the highest bidder. Spartacus, like countless others, was thrust into the dehumanizing machinery of Roman slavery. To be a slave in Rome was to be property, no more than an object, to be used and discarded. Some slaves toiled in fields under the scorching sun. Others suffered in mines, enduring conditions so harsh that few lived beyond a year. For Spartacus, his physical prowess and warrior's spirit marked him for a different fate, the gladiatorial arena. From Thrace, Spartacus was likely transported across the empire, shackled to others who shared his grim fate. His journey would have ended in Capua, a thriving Roman city, known not only for its wealth but for its infamous gladiator schools, or ludi. It was here, in the shadow of luxury and power, that Spartacus entered the domain of Lentulus Batiatus. Lentulus Batiatus was a lanista, a manager of gladiators. To him, Spartacus was not a man but an investment, a future spectacle for the roaring crowds of the arena. The gladiators' training ground, or ludus, was no sanctuary. It was a prison, a place where strength was forged and spirits were broken. Life in the ludus was a brutal cycle of pain and discipline. Each day began with grueling physical training, designed to mold men into killing machines. They were taught to wield swords, spears, and shields with precision. They sparred relentlessly, honing their instincts for survival in combat. Failure was not an option, for the weak were discarded without mercy. Yet Spartacus's story was not one of mere survival. Amidst the humiliation and violence, he emerged as a leader. His fellow gladiators would have seen in him not only a skilled fighter, but a man unbroken by his chains. He would have stood out, not just for his physical strength, but for his unyielding will. In the ludus of Batiatus, Spartacus began to sow the seeds of rebellion. But rebellion was not born in isolation. The gladiators of Capua were men from all corners of the empire: Gauls, Germans, Greeks, Thracians, each with their own grievances, each bound by a common hatred for their oppressors. They were soldiers, farmers, and craftsmen who had been reduced to slaves. Yet, among them, Spartacus rose as a unifying force. Overseeing this brutal institution was Lentulus Batiatus, a man of ambition and greed. Batiatus was no stranger to cruelty. He thrived on the profits of his gladiators, men he trained not out of compassion, but with the cold precision of a businessman. To him, Spartacus was just another slave, a future champion to fill his coffers with gold. Yet, Batiatus's greed would blind him to the storm brewing under his own roof. The ludus, for all its harshness, was also a crucible, a place where bonds were formed and alliances forged. Among Spartacus's companions were men who would become pivotal to the rebellion. Crixus, a fierce Gaul with unmatched strength, Oenomaus, a seasoned gladiator respected for his wisdom, and others who shared a common dream of freedom. Within the confines of the ludus, Spartacus began to plan. Each crack of the whip, each drop of blood spilled in the training arena only strengthened his resolve. He saw not just an escape, but a chance to challenge the very empire that had enslaved him. But how could a handful of gladiators defy the might of Rome? What hope could they possibly have? For Spartacus, hope was not enough. He needed allies, weapons, and a plan. And in the year 73 BCE, the gladiators of Capua would ignite a fire that Rome could not extinguish. This was the beginning of the greatest slave revolt in Roman history, the moment when Spartacus took his first steps on the path to legend. What do you think motivated Spartacus to rise above his circumstances? Relentless warrior's spirit, sheer desperation, or something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments below. With their escape from the ludus of Batiatus, Spartacus and his band of gladiators were fugitives in a land that offered no sanctuary. Yet what began as a desperate bid for freedom soon transformed into something far greater, a rebellion that would challenge the might of Rome itself. At the heart of this rebellion was Spartacus, a warrior by nature and a leader by necessity. He possessed a rare charisma that united men from all walks of life. The escaped gladiators were his foundation. But as the days turned into weeks, others joined his cause, slaves fleeing their masters, peasants weary of Rome's crushing taxes, and even some disillusioned soldiers. To these people, Spartacus was not just a leader, he was a symbol of defiance, a beacon of hope in a world ruled by oppression. Unlike the Roman generals who commanded through rank and fear, Spartacus led by example. He fought alongside his men, endured the same hardships, and shared their victories and losses. This bond forged loyalty that no chain or whip could sever. Rome's first response to the rebellion was dismissive. To the Senate, Spartacus and his followers were a nuisance, not a threat. The task of crushing the uprising was given to lesser commanders, men who underestimated the determination of the rebels and the brilliance of their leader. Spartacus, however, understood that to survive, he could not fight Rome on its terms. His army lacked the discipline and resources of the legions, but they compensated with speed, cunning, and adaptability. Spartacus transformed his followers into a mobile force, striking with precision and vanishing before Roman reinforcements could arrive. The rebels excelled in ambushes, exploiting their knowledge of the rugged terrain of southern Italy. They used forests, hills, and narrow passes to trap and overwhelm Roman forces. Spartacus's strategies were rooted in his experience as a warrior and his understanding of the enemy's arrogance. One of the earliest and most decisive victories came against Claudius Glaber, a Roman praetor sent with an underprepared force to deal with the rebellion. Glaber, dismissing the rebels as mere rabble, made a fatal error. He cornered Spartacus and his men on Mount Vesuvius, believing them trapped. But Spartacus was never one to submit to fate. As the Romans celebrated their supposed triumph, he devised a daring plan. Using vines and makeshift ropes, his men descended the sheer cliffs of the mountain under cover of darkness. By dawn, they emerged behind the Roman camp, catching Glaber's forces completely off guard. The ensuing battle was a rout. Hundreds of Roman soldiers fell. Their camp was destroyed, and Spartacus's legend grew. This victory sent shockwaves through Rome. What had begun as a minor disturbance was now a full-fledged revolt. For the first time, Rome realized that Spartacus was not a fugitive to be captured, but a general to be reckoned with. As news of Spartacus's victories spread, his numbers swelled. Slaves abandoned their masters in droves, risking everything to join his ranks. Free peasants, burdened by Rome's taxes and harsh rule, saw in the rebellion a chance to strike back at their oppressors. By the height of his campaign, Spartacus commanded an army that may have numbered as many as 70,000 men, women, and children. This growth, while a testament to Spartacus's appeal, also brought challenges. Feeding and organizing such a diverse and unruly force required ingenuity. Spartacus established supply lines, raiding Roman storehouses and redistributing the spoils among his followers. He turned his camp into a makeshift society with rules to maintain order and unity. Unlike the Romans, who often plundered indiscriminately, Spartacus's army practiced restraint, especially toward free towns and villages. This policy won him allies and ensured that his movement was not seen as a mere wave of chaos, but as a fight for justice. But as the rebellion grew, so too did tensions within its ranks. Spartacus's vision of the uprising was clear. He sought not vengeance but freedom, a chance to lead his followers out of Italy to safety. To him, the rebellion was a means to an end, not an end in itself. However, not all of his commanders shared this view. Crixus, the Gaul who had fought alongside Spartacus since the escape from Capua, had a different goal. Fierce and proud, Crixus saw the rebellion as an opportunity to strike directly at Rome, to punish the empire for its centuries of conquest and cruelty. This ideological divide came to a head as the rebel army marched through Italy. Spartacus argued for a retreat to the Alps, where his followers could disperse and find freedom beyond Rome's reach. Crixus, however, urged an attack on Rome itself, believing that victory was within their grasp. In the end, the two leaders parted ways. Crixus and his followers, numbering thousands, separated from the main force, seeking their own path of vengeance. But this division proved disastrous. Without Spartacus's leadership, Crixus's contingent was ambushed and annihilated by Roman forces. For Spartacus, the loss was more than a tactical setback. It was a bitter reminder of the cost of disunity. Yet despite these challenges, Spartacus pressed on. His army continued to elude the legions sent to destroy them, carving a path of defiance across the Italian peninsula. With every battle won, his name became a rallying cry for the oppressed and a nightmare for Rome. Spartacus had proven himself a master of strategy and an unmatched leader of men. But as his army grew and Rome's fear turned to fury, the stakes became ever higher. The rebellion was no longer a shadow war on the fringes of the empire. It was a direct challenge to the very heart of Roman authority, and Rome would respond with all the might at its disposal. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and betrayal. Yet for Spartacus and his followers, there was no turning back. The struggle for freedom would continue, no matter the cost. In the heart of Rome, the Senate convened with growing unease. What had started as a small group of escaped slaves had now escalated into a full-scale rebellion that defied all Roman efforts to suppress it. Spartacus and his ever-growing army roamed freely across the Italian peninsula, defeating every force sent against them. For the first time in living memory, the might of Rome seemed vulnerable, not to a foreign enemy, but to those it had enslaved. The rebellion was an affront to Roman pride, a stain on its claim to absolute power. To the senators, Spartacus represented more than a military threat. He was a symbol of defiance that could inspire others to rise. Rome's leaders understood that if they failed to crush this rebellion, their entire social order could begin to unravel. The urgency was clear. The rebellion had to be ended swiftly, decisively, and with a brutality that would discourage any future uprisings. Yet achieving this would prove far more difficult than they imagined. The Senate first turned to its lesser commanders, men they believed could quickly dispatch the rebels. Claudius Glaber, a praetor, had been humiliated on Mount Vesuvius. In the months that followed, other Roman forces met similar fates. Spartacus and his army outmaneuvered them at every turn, using unconventional tactics that the disciplined but rigid Roman legions were ill-prepared to counter. The rebels' victories were not merely tactical. Each Roman defeat emboldened Spartacus's followers and weakened the morale of their enemies. Entire Roman units were routed, their supplies seized, their commanders disgraced. As news of these defeats spread, panic gripped the Italian countryside. Towns and villas fortified their walls, while some even began to question Rome's ability to protect them. The Senate's frustration grew with each failure. They had underestimated Spartacus and overestimated the capabilities of their chosen commanders. Rome's finest generals were occupied elsewhere, fighting wars in Spain and East. What remained were inexperienced or overconfident men, unfit to face a strategist of Spartacus's caliber. By the end of 72 BCE, it was clear that the rebellion could no longer be treated as a minor disturbance. Rome needed a leader who could match Spartacus's cunning and crush the rebellion once and for all. The Senate turned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest and most ambitious men in Rome. Crassus was a shrewd politician and a ruthless commander, known for his unrelenting discipline and willingness to use fear as a weapon. To him, the rebellion was not just a challenge to Rome's authority, it was an opportunity to prove himself on the battlefield and secure his place in history. Crassus's first act was to rebuild the shattered confidence of Rome's legions. He recruited fresh troops and restored discipline through measures that many considered extreme, even by Roman standards. Among these was the ancient practice of decimation, a punishment for cowardice in which 1 in every 10 soldiers of a disgraced unit was executed by their comrades. Crassus believed that fear of failure was a more effective motivator than the promise of reward. Though brutal, Crassus's methods achieved their purpose. Under his command, the Roman legions regained their resolve, marching with renewed determination to face Spartacus. Crassus understood that defeating the rebellion would require more than brute force. It demanded careful strategy, patience, and an understanding of his enemy. Meanwhile, Spartacus faced his own challenges. His army, now numbering in the tens of thousands, had grown too large to sustain through constant movement and raiding. Supplies were running low, and the unity that had once defined his followers was beginning to fray. Spartacus knew that remaining in Italy was a losing proposition. His dream was to lead his people to safety, far from Rome's reach. For Spartacus, Sicily offered hope. The island, with its fertile lands and history of slave revolts, seemed the ideal refuge. Spartacus planned to ferry his army across the Strait of Messina using commandeered ships to evade Roman pursuit. But this daring plan would never come to fruition. According to ancient accounts, Spartacus struck a deal with Cilician pirates to transport his army across the strait. Yet when the moment came, the pirates betrayed him, abandoning his forces on the Italian shore. Without the means to cross, Spartacus was forced to turn back, his hopes of escape dashed. This failure was a turning point in the rebellion. Spartacus's army, once a symbol of boundless defiance, now found itself cornered. Crassus seized the opportunity, constructing a massive trench and wall to trap the rebels in the southern region of Italy. Cut off from supplies and reinforcements, Spartacus's options dwindled. Yet even in the face of overwhelming odds, he refused to surrender. The rebellion had reached its final act. For Spartacus and his followers, the road ahead led not to freedom but to a reckoning. The Roman response had been slow and fraught with missteps, but now, under Crassus's command, it was unrelenting. Spartacus would fight on, not for survival, but for the enduring hope of liberty. The stage was set for the greatest battle of the rebellion, a battle that would decide the fate of Spartacus and the slaves who had dared to defy an empire. Do you think Crassus's brutal tactics, like the decimation of his own troops, were necessary to defeat Spartacus, or did they reveal a deeper fear of losing control? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. By the winter of 71 BCE, the rebellion that had once shaken Rome to its core was nearing its breaking point. The rebel army, once a united force of tens of thousands, was now fragmented, weary, and running out of options. What had begun as a desperate fight for freedom had turned into a bitter struggle for survival. Supplies were dwindling, morale was fading, and disagreements among the rebels had fractured their unity. Some, like Spartacus, still dreamed of freedom beyond Rome's reach. Others, driven by desperation or vengeance, sought to confront the Romans head-on, regardless of the cost. These divisions weakened the army's resolve, and Crassus, ever the opportunist, seized the moment to tighten his grip on the rebellion. For Spartacus, this was a time of impossible choices. Every path forward seemed fraught with danger. His options were slipping away, and with them, the hopes of thousands who had placed their lives in his hands. With the walls of Crassus's trench hemming him in and the Roman legions closing the noose, Spartacus made a fateful decision. He would no longer retreat, no longer seek escape. Instead, he would confront Crassus directly, leading his army into battle one last time. To Spartacus, this was not merely a military strategy, it was a statement of defiance, refusal to surrender to the power that had enslaved him and his followers. In preparation for the final battle, Spartacus rallied his troops with the same fiery determination that had carried them through years of rebellion. He knew the odds were against them. Crassus's forces were larger, better equipped, and disciplined. Yet Spartacus appealed to something deeper than strategy. He spoke of freedom, of the lives they had reclaimed from the chains of Rome, and of the legacy they could leave behind. It is said that before the battle, Spartacus sacrificed his horse, declaring that if they won, he would take one from the Romans, and if they lost, he would have no need of it. Whether this tale is true or a later embellishment, it reflects the spirit of a man who was willing to stand and fight, even in the face of certain defeat. The final confrontation took place on the plains of Salaris, a desolate stretch of land where the rebel army made its stand against the forces of Crassus. The Roman general, meticulous as ever, had deployed his legions in a disciplined formation, encircling Spartacus's forces and cutting off any chance of retreat. Spartacus, however, was not one to go quietly. Leading his men from the front, he charged directly into the heart of the Roman lines, aiming to reach Crassus himself. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic, a desperate clash of swords, shields, and sheer will. The rebels fought with the ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose, while the Romans, hardened by Crassus's discipline, held their ground with unyielding precision. Despite their courage, the rebels were hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. The Roman legions, methodical and relentless, gradually wore them down, cutting through their ranks with brutal efficiency. Spartacus himself is said to have fought with extraordinary valor, slaying Roman soldiers even as the tide of battle turned against him. According to some accounts, he came within striking distance of Crassus before being overwhelmed. And then, as the battle raged on, Spartacus disappeared. His body was never found, his final moments lost to the chaos and bloodshed of the battlefield. Some believe he fell in the fighting, surrounded by the comrades who had followed him to the end. Others suggest he may have escaped, his fate remaining a mystery. Whatever the truth, Spartacus's rebellion ended that day in a blaze of defiance that would echo through history. For the rebels who survived the battle, there would be no mercy. Crassus, eager to send a message to all who might dare challenge Rome, ordered the crucifixion of 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way. Stretching from Capua to Rome, this gruesome display served as a stark reminder of Rome's power and its willingness to crush any threat to its authority. The sight of thousands of crosses lining the road must have been harrowing, a testament to the price of defiance in a world ruled by tyranny. Yet even in death, the rebels' sacrifice carried a message that Rome could not erase. Spartacus and his followers had dared to dream of a life without chains, and in doing so, they had planted the seeds of resistance that would resonate for centuries. For Rome, the rebellion was over, but the memory of Spartacus endured. His name would become a symbol of the fight for freedom, invoked by revolutionaries, writers, and dreamers throughout history. Though he perished on the plains of Salaris, Spartacus achieved a kind of immortality, not as a slave, but as a hero who defied an empire. The final battle of Spartacus was not simply the end of a rebellion. It was the culmination of a struggle that revealed the cracks in Rome's seemingly unassailable power. It exposed the brutality of the system that sustained the empire and the courage of those who dared to resist it. Though Spartacus's uprising was ultimately crushed, its legacy lives on. His story reminds us of the enduring human desire for freedom, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It challenges us to question the systems of power and oppression that have shaped our world, and to honor the sacrifices of those who have fought against them. This is the story of Spartacus, a man, a warrior, a symbol. Though his rebellion ended in blood and fire, his spirit continues to inspire, reminding us that even the mightiest empires are not immune to the dreams of the oppressed. The rebellion of Spartacus was crushed, his followers defeated, and his dream of freedom extinguished on the battlefields of Italy. But even in defeat, Spartacus left a legacy that outlived the empire that sought to erase him. His rebellion revealed a profound truth about Rome. Its strength was also its greatest weakness. At its height, Rome ruled through power, wealth, and an economy fueled by slavery. Millions of men, women, and children were enslaved to build its cities, feed its citizens, and sustain its wars of conquest. Yet the rebellion of Spartacus laid bare the fragility of this foundation. The empire, for all its grandeur, was deeply dependent on the labor and submission of those it enslaved. When that submission faltered, the entire system teetered on the brink of chaos. The Third Servile War, as Rome came to call it, was not the first slave uprising in its history, nor would it be the last, but it was by far the most devastating, forcing the Senate to confront the reality that their enslaved population, if united, posed a greater threat than any foreign army. Spartacus's rebellion served as a warning, reminder that beneath the chains of slavery lay the potential for resistance. In the years following his death, Spartacus became a figure of both fear and fascination. To the Romans, he was a cautionary tale, his name evoked as a warning against disobedience. The writers of antiquity, such as Plutarch and Appian, chronicled his rebellion, though often through the lens of Roman propaganda. They portrayed him as a capable leader but framed his revolt as a doomed act of defiance against an inevitable power. Yet even within these accounts, glimpses of admiration emerge. Spartacus was described as a man of courage, intelligence, and principle, a leader who inspired loyalty and commanded respect, even among his enemies. For all their disdain, the Romans could not deny the extraordinary nature of his rebellion. But the Spartacus of history was only the beginning. Over the centuries, his story grew beyond the confines of Roman accounts, transforming into legend. In the Middle Ages, Spartacus was a shadowy figure, his name surviving in fragments. By the 18th and 19th centuries, however, he began to re-emerge, celebrated by revolutionaries, writers, and thinkers who saw in him a symbol of resistance against tyranny. In the modern era, Spartacus became a global icon. His story resonated with those who fought against oppression, from the abolitionists of the 19th century to the labor movements of the 20th. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels cited Spartacus as a hero of the proletariat, a leader who embodied the struggle of the oppressed against the ruling class. His name became a rallying cry for those seeking justice and equality. What is it about Spartacus that continues to captivate us? Perhaps it is the sheer audacity of his rebellion, a man who dared to defy the greatest empire of his time. Perhaps it is the universal appeal of his struggle, a fight not for power or wealth, but for freedom, for dignity, for the right to live as a human being rather than a possession. Spartacus's legacy endures because his story is more than history. It is a symbol of resistance against oppression in all its forms. He represents the timeless desire for liberty that transcends culture, era, and circumstance. His rebellion reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit has the power to resist, to dream, and to fight for a better world. This legacy is reflected in the arts, from novels and plays to films and television. Howard Fast's novel Spartacus and Stanley Kubrick's iconic film brought his story to new audiences, portraying him as a hero of the people. These interpretations, while romanticized, capture the essence of Spartacus's appeal, the idea that even a single voice can inspire many to rise against injustice. In every era, Spartacus has been reimagined to reflect the struggles of the time. He has been a gladiator, a revolutionary, a freedom fighter. Yet at his core, Spartacus remains what he always was, a symbol of hope for the downtrodden and a reminder that even the mightiest empires can be challenged by the will of the oppressed. The rebellion of Spartacus may have ended in defeat, but its spirit endures. It endures in the stories we tell, in the movements that seek justice, and in the belief that no chain is unbreakable. Spartacus's life was short, his rebellion crushed, but his legacy is eternal, a testament to the power of defiance and the enduring fight for freedom. As we look back on the life of Spartacus, we are reminded of the countless others who have stood against oppression, many whose names have been lost to history. Spartacus is not just a man. He is an idea, a symbol of the human spirit's unyielding desire to be free. This is the legacy of Spartacus, not in the battles he fought, but in the hope he inspired. His story belongs not just to the past, but to all who dream of a future where liberty prevails. If you found Spartacus's story as inspiring and thought-provoking as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. Let us know in the comments, what does Spartacus's legacy mean to you? Join us as we uncover more incredible stories from the past. Together, let's keep history alive